Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I was rummaging through the cluttered garage at my parents' house this past weekend, trying to help them finally clean it out. It was long overdue to get organized and toss anything we no longer needed. As I dug through moldy boxes and moved aside old dusty power tools, I suddenly came across my beloved childhood mountain bike, tucked way back in the rear corner. Seeing it instantly flooded me with cherished memories from my adolescence. Countless carefree days speeding around the neighborhood on that trusty bike, popping wheelies, jumping curbs, sometimes even wiping out on daredevil stunts. It took me on so many adventures and gave me freedom to explore without needing a ride. That bike was my prized possession and most valued material item all through middle school. Looking at it now as a 30-something adult living in a downtown apartment, I realized I had no practical use for it anymore, but it seemed too sentimental to simply throw away either. I decided I would try selling it on Craigslist. That way it might bring some other kid the same joy it had brought me rather than sitting unused. I spent some time hosing off the dust and grime to clean it up as best I could. I took a few pictures and made a post advertising it for $100, being upfront that it was vintage from the 90s but still in good working order. I didn't really care about making max dollars. I just hoped it would end up with an owner who appreciated it. Later that evening, I got a text from a guy named Steve asking if it was still for sale. He said he had a teenage son who was hoping to get a bike, and this looked like it would be a great fit. We exchanged a few polite messages back and forth, and he seemed like a normal dad looking to get his kid an affordable first bike. When I mentioned I had another person interested at my $100 asking price, he offered $110 to seal the deal. I agreed, sold. We made plans to meet in the parking lot of a nearby grocery store that same night so I could hand it over. As I pulled up and started unloading the bike, I immediately got uneasy vibes about the guy. He looked rough, haggard face, bloodshot eyes, jittery energy like he was strung out on something. Not exactly the nice, wholesome dad I had pictured from our texts, but I reminded myself not to judge a book by its cover. He looked over the bike and said it was even better than expected. But then he asked if he could take it for a quick test ride around the empty parking lot just to make sure the gears still shift smoothly. It seemed a reasonable request, so even though my gut said no, I reluctantly agreed. I figured I'd rather have him test it now under my watch than have him complain later if something wasn't working properly. I did suggest he wear a helmet for safety's sake, but he brushed off my concern, saying he'd just be a minute and didn't want to bother getting out of his car. Looking back, that should have been my first red flag something was amiss. He pedaled up and down a few empty rows of the vacant parking lot, gears clicking smoothly as he shifted through them. At first glance, everything appeared functional and in working order, but then he asked if he could ride it out of the lot and onto the main street for a minute or two, just to really open it up and get it up to speed, test the brakes and handling. Again, I hesitantly agreed, even though my gut was screaming not to let it leave my sight. The whole situation just kept getting stranger. But in the moment, I didn't want to provoke him if I refused. He was bigger than me and increasingly unpredictable, so against my better judgment, I stood there numbly watching as he stepped out of the parking lot entrance and pedaled vigorously down the road until he faded from view. I waited anxiously, pacing around while scanning the horizon for any sign of him returning. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Still no bike, no sign of the man either. After nearly an hour of waiting in vain with no return, the harsh reality set in that neither were coming back. My beloved childhood bike was gone, along with the $110 cash I was promised, and the person responsible had disappeared without a trace. I drove all around the neighborhood searching desperately, but it was no use. No trace of the bike or the shady guy who duped me. I was absolutely furious with him, but even more angry and ashamed at myself. How could I have been so foolish and trusting with a complete sketchy stranger, handing over something so precious to me without a second thought or any collateral? All the warning signs were right there that he was shifty. But I let nostalgia for that old bike and rosy memories of our adventures blind me to the grim realities of the risky situation unfolding right in front of me. I ignored every instinct telling me not to let it leave my hands or sight, But like a fool, I did anyway, and I paid the price. My emotions got the best of me, and a manipulative person took full advantage, knowing he could spin a sob story to play into those feelings. He expertly conned his way into gaining my trust within minutes, and unfortunately, I fell for it, too focused on the past to see the clear dangers of the present moment. A hard lesson learned which still stings every time I think back on it. I tried in vain to report it to the police, but they basically laughed it off, saying because I willingly handed over the bike, there was nothing they could do. I would just have to chalk it up as an expensive life lesson. My wife and I were over the moon to welcome our new baby girl last month, but we quickly realized our tiny two-door sedan was not going to work anymore with a child in tow. There was barely room for a car seat in the back, let alone all the other baby gear that comes along with having a little one. Plus, no more space for groceries or anything else we needed to haul around. It was time for a bigger, more practical family vehicle. Being on a tight budget, though, a brand new minivan was out of the question. I browsed Craigslist searching for a decent used one that would fit within our price range. I cringed looking at listing after listing for rusted-out old Dodge Caravans with ripped seats and 200,000 plus miles on them. But with patience, I finally came across a posting for a 2008 Honda Odyssey with 108,000 miles being sold for $5,000. That was on the upper end of what we could afford, but the photos made it look clean. I contacted the seller who claimed it drove great with no issues and all the maintenance was up to date. He was firm on the price, but I figured it was worth at least taking for a test drive. We arranged to meet that Saturday morning so I could check it out in person. I borrowed my buddy's truck to haul it home if I decided to buy. As I pulled up to the seller's house located about 30 minutes outside of town, I immediately got bad vibes. The place was ramshackle and dilapidated looking. Junk scattered all about the front lawn. The minivan was parked haphazardly on the curb, but everything else just felt off. I considered turning around right then, but convinced myself I was being paranoid. I cautiously approached the van to inspect it. The exterior was surprisingly clean aside from some minor scratches and dings you'd expect on an older vehicle. The interior smelled vaguely of smoke residue, but was decent overall for the mileage. Stains on the cloth seats, but no tears or anything broken. I took it for a quick spin around the block, and it drove smooth with no noticeable issues in the engine or transmission. At this point, I just wanted to get my money's worth and get the heck out of there away from the bad juju of the surroundings. The seller was a gruff, unsavory-looking middle-aged guy with greasy hair who remained silent through most of the transaction. I showed him the cash and he signed over the title, avoiding making any eye contact. The whole encounter made me uneasy, but I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid. This was a good deal and we needed a bigger vehicle. I loaded the minivan onto the truck and headed home, feeling excited to surprise my wife with it. She was thrilled when she saw it parked in the driveway. We immediately transferred over the baby's car seat and took our little one on her first drive around town in the new family-wheeled beast. My wife raved about all the extra room and how smooth it handled. After days of stressing about finding one in our budget, I was grateful it all worked out. The next morning, with the kiddo strapped into her seat again, I decided to take the Odyssey out to run some errands. As I cautiously backed out of the driveway and drove down our quiet residential street, I noticed a police cruiser pull out a few cars behind me. I kept checking the rear view and sure enough, he was following me. I drove slowly and carefully, unsure why I was being tailed when I wasn't speeding or doing anything wrong. Soon enough, the lights flipped on, and I was forced to pull over to the side of the road, my adrenaline spiking. The officer cautiously approached with his hand on his holster and firmly ordered me to slowly exit the vehicle and put my hands in the air. Heart pounding, I nervously complied, completely baffled about what was happening. He then commanded me to get down on my knees before handcuffing me. 2 other squad cars had arrived as backup, making the situation even more tense. It was then finally explained to me that the minivan I had just purchased was reported stolen and had been involved in a high-speed chase and shootout with police just 2 nights prior. The armed suspects had gotten away in the van and cops had been combing the area looking for it ever since. The officer said he had to impound it for evidence, but I wasn't officially under arrest yet. I frantically explained that I had just bought the Odyssey on Craigslist yesterday morning, having absolutely no idea about its sordid criminal history. It took my shocked and shaken statement before eventually uncuffing me and letting me go with just a citation for possession of a stolen vehicle. But the minivan was towed away to be processed, leaving me without the vehicle I had just paid $5,000 cash for. I was simultaneously flooded with relief I wouldn't face charges, but also rage that I was now at $5,000 with nothing to show for it. I cursed myself for not fully trusting my gut when I first arrived at that sketchy rundown home. My wife was flabbergasted when I got back and told her the insane story. We were just thankful I made it out of the situation safely. But it definitely taught me an important lesson on being super vigilant when it comes to private party vehicle sales. You truly never know what kind of shady underground activities a car or a minivan could secretly be involved in. We certainly learned that the hard way. Just another cautionary tale of the risks that come with the temptation of great deals on Craigslist. I was in desperate need of a new dresser. The bottom drawer of the cheap particle board one I had was basically crumbling beneath my socks and underwear. But with my tight budget, I was going to have to get creative. I browsed Craigslist to see if I could find something quality on the cheap. After clicking through endless overpriced junk, I finally spotted a nice solid wood dresser for only $30. It looked a little worn in the photos, but I figured for that price, it was worth checking out. The seller said I could come take a look and paid out that same afternoon. He included his address, which appeared to be about a 30-minute drive out of town into a more rural area. The isolated location gave me pause at first, but then I told myself to stop being so paranoid. It was broad daylight after all. When I pulled up the long dirt driveway, my apprehension returned. The property looked decrepit and neglected. An old cottage-style house with peeling paint and overgrown weeds throughout the yard. I hesitated before getting out of the car, but convinced myself I was just being silly. I knocked on the front door, which creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with disheveled hair and a wild look in his eyes. He stared at me in silence before jerking his head, signaling me to come inside. Every instinct told me to turn and run, but foolishly I still followed him in, thinking maybe he was just eccentric. Immediately, I was hit with an overwhelming stench of body odor, mothballs, and general mustiness. Every square inch of the place was filled with stacks of old furniture, tools, books, and boxes, a hoarder's paradise. I followed directly behind the man as he led me down a cramped hallway. But I had to pause for a moment when I noticed the walls were littered with framed photos of infamous serial killers. Pictures of Dahmer, Bundy, Manson, and more, all staring back at me with sinister eyes. A chilling realization that this man clearly idolized these murderers for some twisted reason. Against my better judgment, I continued following him into a cluttered bedroom toward the back of the house. I just wanted to verify the dresser quality so I could hurry back outside to the safety of my car. The dresser itself looked decent enough, if a bit battered and worn around the edges. As I quickly inspected each drawer, sliding them open one by one, the man stood uncomfortably close behind me the whole time without speaking a word. I could feel his hot breath on the back of my neck and hear his heavy breathing just inches from my ear. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up and sent a chill down my spine. The complete silence around us was deafening, only amplifying the sense that we were totally isolated out there in the middle of nowhere. No one would be able to hear me if I screamed or cried for help. We were alone on his creepy property where anything could happen. I tried to break the tense quiet by saying I would take the dresser, hoping that would allow me to swiftly pay and exit this terrifying situation. I slowly reached for my wallet in my back pocket when a stray Polaroid tucked away in the back corner of the bottom drawer caught my eye. Hand in shaking, I carefully pulled it out to reveal a graphic image of a young woman bound and gagged on a dirt floor, eyes wide with terror. My heart dropped into my stomach and panic flooded my nervous system. This confirmed my worst fears about this man. Everything in me screamed that I needed to get the hell out of there immediately. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, priming me to either stand and fight or take flight. Every instinct told me to choose the latter for my best chance of survival. This man was clearly dangerous and unpredictable. I had to stay calm and formulate an escape plan. My brain scrambled, heart racing, knowing one false move could make this day my last. I mumbled an excuse about forgetting my wallet in my car and backed away from the man as calmly as I could, though I'm sure my wide eyes betrayed my fear. He continued staring at me in unnerving silence as I fumbled my way toward the front door. The second I was outside and had scrambled back into my car, I floored it down the dirt road, kicking up plumes of dust in my wake. My hands shook as I drove, replaying the terror of what I had just encountered. I knew in my gut that man was dangerous. The house, the photos, the Polaroid, it all painted a sinister picture. Even when I got safely home, I couldn't shake the chilling feeling that had overcome me inside that remote house. I decided to go to the police and report the incident in case it could help some future investigation, though they said there was little action they could take at the moment. I also realized then I should always listen to my intuition in those types of situations. Needless to say, I never did get that dresser. As much as I needed a replacement, no piece of furniture was worth going through that nightmare again. The broken one would have to suffice. At least it couldn't harbor any nasty secrets inside like that serial killer memorabilia collection. The whole encounter taught me you can't be too cautious when meeting strangers to buy items, especially alone. I now insist on visiting only public places like coffee shops rather than going to their home. I bring along a friend just in case. You really never know what darkness someone may be hiding or what sinister secrets may be stashed inside their home. I'm just thankful I made it out of there unharmed with a chilling story I'll certainly never forget. My trusty laptop was really showing its age after over 5 years of near daily use. The battery now lasted maybe 15 minutes unplugged on a good day before the machine shut off. Even plugged in, it wheezed, constantly trying to complete basic computing tasks like opening web browsers or using office programs. Web pages took ages to load with the outdated components and limited RAM. Honestly, the old thing was barely limping along, and nearing the end of its usable life. I knew it was long overdue for me to upgrade. The only problem was money was extremely tight for me at the moment. I had some savings set aside, but certainly not enough to go purchase one of those shiny new MacBooks I drooled over in my dreams. Those cost upwards of $2,000, well beyond my current budget. I browsed Craigslist to see if I could find a more affordable secondhand laptop that would still be a major upgrade over my decrepit device. I didn't need the absolute latest and greatest new model, but ideally I hoped to find something relatively modern produced within the last few years so it wouldn't feel totally ancient and clunky. After a bunch of scrolling and filtering search terms, one particular listing caught my eye, a 2-year-old MacBook Pro being sold for $800. That was almost half the price it would cost brand new direct from Apple. The seller explained in his ad he had purchased a couple years ago, but rarely used it around the house. Now he urgently needed quick cash for bills and was willing to take a loss. He even included a screenshot of the original Best Buy receipt to add legitimacy and prove this was no Chinese knockoff. The deal seemed almost too good to be true, but I had to pursue it. I reached out to the seller named Chris, and he quickly responded suggesting we meet up that evening at the Starbucks on 5th Street so I could inspect the laptop in person before buying. That seemed smart to me. Always wise to meet somewhere public for these sorts of transactions. We confirmed a time that evening that worked for both of our schedules. Earlier that day, I withdrew $800 cash from my bank account so I would have the exact amount on hand based on our negotiations. The ATM even dispensed it in crisp sequential $100 bills, which made me feel extra official handing over this wad of cash later. I tried to temper my excitement on the drive to Starbucks. Craigslist deals can always go sideways, but I remained hopeful this one would pan out. I walked in scanning the scattered tables and stools for my contact. A 30-something guy smiled and waved me over to his corner spot. He introduced himself as Chris and showed me the MacBook, still factory sealed in plastic wrap, just as he had described. Through the thin wrapping, I could see the sleek silver body looked flawless and pristine, like it truly was brand new right out of the box. Chris explained he kept it wrapped like this since purchasing it, using his desktop more often instead. Hence why it remained in such flawless condition despite being a couple model years old. He carefully broke the seal and we opened it out to power on. It booted extremely quickly with no hesitation over spinning wheels of death. The Retina display looked crystal clear and vibrant. The backlit keyboard had that satisfying MacBook feel, and the trackpad was smooth as butter. Chris logged in to demonstrate the OS was current and all the programs and apps opened swiftly, showing the hardware was still speedy and responsive. This thing seemed 100% authentic and I was thrilled. We finalized the cash sale and I forked over those $100 bills totaling $800. easiest purchase I'd ever made. Giddy with excitement on the drive home, I was eager to get my new MacBook Pro unwrapped, set up, and start using it for both work and play. I decided I would keep the remaining plastic wrap on for just a bit longer to preserve that ultra-pristine condition as long as possible. Carefully peeling the edges back, I opened the sleek aluminum lid. But instead of a sharp retina display and backlit keyboard staring back at me, I was faced with a slab of slate rock precisely cut and crafted into the exact shape of the laptop interior. My stomach sank and my heart began racing. This masterfully designed chunk of stone had been wrapped to perfectly mimic the size, shape, texture, and weight of the real MacBook through the plastic cocoon. But it was merely an elaborate dummy prop, skillfully created to deceive me. The seller had seemed totally normal and trustworthy under the watchful eye of the casual coffee shop environment. But now I realized Chris was likely a fake name, and this guy was just an expert con man running an intricate bait and switch scam daily on unsuspecting victims like me. And I had fallen for it completely, thinking I scored an unbelievable deal. Panicked and furious, I immediately tried calling the number I had reached him at originally, but it went straight to a generic voicemail box not set up. I left a barrage of angry messages demanding he return my $800 immediately, but I knew it was pointless. That burner number was long gone, as was any trace of the swindler. My $800 cash was surely lining his pockets or funding his next deception. I felt nauseous knowing I couldn't afford the financial hit from this fraudulent deal, especially with the holidays right around the corner. But I also had no feasible way to track this guy down without even a real name or address for him. Just a swindler's disposable prepaid phone number that was already disconnected. How could I have been so naive and gullible? All the textbook warning signs were right there screaming that this was too good to be true. But I ignored my spidey senses and let wishful thinking cloud my better judgment. Now I was paying the price literally to the tune of $800. The police basically shrugged when I filed a report, saying Craigslist scams were rampant and victims rarely got justice or recovered stolen funds. Since I willingly handed over the cash, they considered this more of a civil dispute than criminal fraud. No chance of me ever seeing that $800 again. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.